Now that the non-conference slate is over, we got to answer some pressing questions about key players on this Penn State offense, the quarterback, and one of those star running backs.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football, and as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day, your daily source for all things Penn State sports. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling. A little bit of a depth chart shakeup for Penn State. So after the non-conference slate, I think we get some answers and actually some surprises here with backups overtaking some of these predetermined starters. We'll get to that in the final segment. Initial Penn State versus Oregon scouting report in the framing of a question. These are direct questions that we are going to answer in this episode, but we got to start with the most pressing ones after the non-conference slate, particularly surrounding the offense. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. Friendly reminder to let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. So we got to start with the quarterback, Nicholas Singleton, and then we're going to get to the offensive line. Okay, so these are pretty open-ended but direct questions. Is Drew Allar okay? How has he regressed so much? I want to put it into perspective when talking about Allar because it is significant. I thought this was an interesting stat that was pointed out on social media. Allar right now has a quarterback rating outside of the top 100. And Penn State, this so far, to open up with these three games against Nevada, against FIU, and against Villanova. And again, these performances haven't been promising. Sure, against Nevada, really good, really efficient, no turnovers, 22 of 26, all those things that you want to see, but it would have been nice to see them over these 3 weeks, again, against inferior competition. And it forced the offense to sputter. But Allar right now is outside of the top 100 in terms of QBR, but Penn State is outscoring opponents 132-17. And remember, some of those points come against the reserve defense in garbage time. Okay, the touchdown against Villanova, right? It was a SportsCenter top 10, just to cover that spread. So did Drew Allar really take that much of a step backward despite being a year 4 quarterback, year 4 of college football, third year starter, second year in Andy Kotelnicki's system where he really started to get it going? I do think there's an element of Allar does overthink at times, or he can be a perfectionist. I do think there's an element to that. But this seems a little too egregious now where Allar has gone from at least a top half quarterback where I think he's solidly, look, I do believe that he can be a top 10 quarterback in college football right now. And I would like to think that he'd be a top 5 one given that he is a senior. And with all of this, with the offense just taking a step forward, the offensive line's better. The ground game's supposed to be better. You have your coordinator back. You upgraded at wide receiver. There really isn't an excuse for it, right? Unless the explanation is that Penn State is truly kind of holding something back, or they're just experimenting with things. Again, you don't need to show a whole lot. You don't need to prove yourself, so to speak, against Villanova, against FIU, against Nevada, against this non-conference schedule. I do believe still that Penn State, if they wanted to, could score 70 points on all 3 of those teams. But I've said it before and I'll say it again. They have bigger fish to fry. Oregon, Ohio State, a Big Ten slate that's still going to be unforgiving, even though it's not necessarily the most challenging. I would have loved to have seen a USC or a Michigan matchup, but Nebraska's still on there. Indiana, right? Why do you need those plays against Villanova and FIU most recently? Again, Nevada, this non-conference slate, but then there's Indiana and then there's Nebraska, and I know that's further down the road. So it's just almost inexplicable how Allar can take that much of a step backwards. Again, I do think there can be some changes. I've said that, hey, maybe James Franklin needs to just be a little more involved, a little more active with his communication, because some of these mistakes just don't make any sense. And you just have to get that and have it cut out as soon as possible. So those are some changes that I would like to see, but that's the first part of it, is that Allar has not been himself. So in these 2 weeks to prep for Oregon like this, can he return to form, or return to a better form that we kind of expected early on here? Same thing with Nicholas Singleton, but this one's a little more self-explanatory. At least I have a reason for it that is a little more defined. New running backs coach, Stan Drayton. Difference in coaching, difference in style. Drayton has been very apparent, and James Franklin has echoed this, that they are trying to get both Kaytron Allen and Nicholas Singleton to see the game differently. They can do a lot of things, but they were surviving on purely athleticism. That you're just really good athletes, but let's make you better college football players. Let's help you see the football field better. Well, Kaytron Allen has responded accordingly, because those weren't necessary. And Singleton kind of seems like more of the athlete. He's the track star, so to speak. He's that home run hitter. Whereas Kaytron Allen's always been your between the tackles guy, really relies on vision, stop and go, that type of thing. And that's what Singleton is working through. So if I've already said this before, and I'll say it again. What is wrong with Singleton? Nothing. You have to take, in this instance, and maybe this applies to Drew too, where you have to take a step backward to go forward. And a lot of steps, you take one step backwards to go 5, 10, 15 steps forward in the case of Singleton. And same thing, it is egregious. There is an analytic that is being thrown around about the elusive rating and everything, that he is bottom 3 in elusive rating in the entire country. And that's just not Singleton. I will say that Singleton's not necessarily the best at breaking tackles. I think he gets tripped up more often than not. That is truly my criticism. People will say vision and things like that, but then when he does hit the home runs, what do you chalk that up to? He has to have the vision to see the lane for those. So did that just all go away? I don't truly buy that. But fortunately for Penn State, they have 2 weeks to prep and get Drew Allar and Nicholas Singleton to better versions of themselves. Now, is the offensive line improving? That's another part of this equation as well, because the offensive line has been up and down. I will say this, pass protection could be better. Could be better. I think they're letting up some easy pressure that they really shouldn't be. But in run blocking, and that's going to be one of the keys to beating Oregon, which I'm going to explain in the upcoming segment. The offensive line is looking significantly better when it comes to run blocking. Kaytron Allen has benefited. Singleton had a better game against Villanova. But Penn State, those front five, they are just pushing people off the line of scrimmage. I don't think pass protection's been bad either. Could be better. But run blocking, really, I think run blocking and the ground game in general, Penn State's going to be able to lean on that. Don't forget, they showed it in the Big Ten championship last year against SMU. These were good opponents, remember, Boise State and Notre Dame, and that's where they had some of their best production on the ground game. I think we're going to see that again, and Penn State lean into that, and it's also going to open things up for Drew Allar. So don't sell out on the season, right? It is frustrating. It was exhausting to watch that game against Villanova when it came to the offense, but throw it away. Use these 2 weeks to fully prepare for Oregon, and I do think we're going to see a different version of Penn State's offense, in particular, that will make them look much more like a formidable opponent and that number 2 team in the country. We got more to get into as far as direct questions about this matchup with Penn State versus Oregon, starting with what should the Nittany Lions be concerned about the most when it comes to this Oregon matchup that's coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by The Game. Quick question for all you college football fans out there. If you could go back in time and sit front row at your school's biggest rivalry game, what hat would you be wearing? Yes, I said hat. For me, it would be The Game. These aren't just hats. They're the same vintage styles that fans wore back in the 80s and in the 90s. And guess what? They still go for the same price that they did back then. When you use code LOCKEDON, you will get your vintage hat for $16.99. And yes, they are available for Penn State fans. There is a Penn State game cap available for you over at thegamecaps.com. That is thegamecaps.com. Grab your team's classic bar or retro circle design available in Penn State and use code LOCKEDON for an exclusive discount because legends wear the game. And this episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Caffeine just got a flavor upgrade. 5 Hour Energy shots deliver tasty caffeine in 17 bold flavors. Each 2-ounce shot packs the caffeine of a premium 12-ounce cup of coffee, plus B vitamins and nutrients with 0 sugar and 0 crashes. What you'll love most is how portable they are. Big taste, tiny shot. You can take it anywhere and get that boost when you need it. So that's the best. It's the convenience. Being able to take 5 Hour Energy with you on the go. And how fast it kicks in. It's sugar-free. You're not compromising on any taste. So you don't have to worry about crashing later and not enjoying what you're drinking. Enough with boring, flavorless caffeine. It's time to give your caffeine a flavor upgrade with 5 Hour Energy shots. Get your favorites, get the favorites you love, or be bold. Try something new in-store or online at 5hourenergy.com. That's the number 5hourenergy.com or over at Amazon today. Still on the way in this show, we're going to talk about how there might be a bit of a depth chart shakeup here. Couple positions on the defensive side of the football that might see some changes. And then on the offense, is it Luke Reynolds? Is it Khalil Dinkins? Is there a new tight end number 1 emerging for the Nittany Lions? We'll pick back up and dive right into this Penn State-Oregon matchup and continue to just answer direct questions. Not really speculate and kind of go right to it. What should Penn State be most concerned about when it comes to this Oregon team? And I say Oregon's pass rush. Okay, Oregon's front 4 from a season ago, I think was better overall. They lost 2 starting defensive tackles. So the interior, that's a matchup that I'm going to keep an eye on here. But with Penn State, Drew Shelton hasn't looked his best. I think he's looked good, but he hasn't looked his best. Same thing with Nolan Rucci. At times, just a couple of plays here and there. And again, we've talked about the O-line miscommunications. Some of that has to do with the running backs involved in blocking as well, and tight ends. So it's not just, it is Nolan Rucci's fault. It's Drew Shelton's fault. It's in combination, because it's a combo block, that I'm seeing those show up. So the tight ends and the tackles aren't on the same page. The running backs and the guards aren't on the same page. It's not just the offensive line. But with what we've seen, and because Oregon just has so much talent there, these are the names that you need to know at defensive end for the Ducks. Tatum Tuioti and Mateo Uiagalelei. Those guys are avid pass rushers. They're also very good against the run. But that's the matchup where, Drew Allar, if he doesn't feel comfortable in the pocket, if Penn State has had some issues with allowing pressure off of the edge. And again, if that, kind of sets that clock off in Drew Allar's head, that I got to get rid of the football sooner rather than later, it's that matchup that can really change the course of this game. And one of those matchups that I'm going to be watching and circling here early on that can really influence this game. What is the key to beating Oregon here? Because I think Penn State is going to be favored. They have home field advantage. Again, despite the offense being disappointing to this point, being exhausting at times to watch, Penn State is still going to be favored here, and they can beat Oregon. What is the key? It's running the football. It is controlling the pace of the game, winning that time possession battle. Can you create those explosive plays in the ground game, but also can you sustain the 10, 12, 15 play drives? One leads into the other. Winning teams run the football. So that's one. So if you're running the football a lot, if you're Penn State or even if you're Oregon, you're probably winning this football game. That's the starting point there. But You control the time of possession. You control the pace of the game. You get to decide. In Oregon, you don't want that offense. I've already said it. You don't want to get into a track meet with them. I think Penn State can put up some points against this Oregon team. But are we talking, touchdown for touchdown? Some of these SEC games early on that I've seen where it's 45 to 42, 49 to 45. Can Penn State do that? I don't think so. And if you want to avoid that kind of result, where you're in this constant back and forth matchup where it's pedal to the metal, you have to be able to run the rock. It also imposes that physicality, and it's something that Penn State has been successful with in the past against Oregon. Penn State was able to run the football. I think Kaytron Allen was averaging double digits in yards per carry against Oregon in the Big Ten Championship. That's where this offensive line, a majority of it, Anthony Donko's the only one that's not a part of that group, that dominated Oregon up front. So if they're missing if they have defensive tackle changes, again, that's not the same interior of the defensive line. They sent a first-round pick to the NFL and Derek Harmon. Oregon has a new look defensive interior. The linebackers are good. I don't think they're great. I don't think they're elite, but that is a solid duo and one of the better ones in the country. You can attack this defense with the inside zone. So Nicholas Singleton has 2 weeks to start to regain form. Kaytron Allen, I think Kaytron Allen's going to have a phenomenal day and be one of those X-factor players in this because Penn State needs to run the football. That is the key to winning the game. It also keeps Oregon's offense on the sideline, as I pointed out, but let me explain it further. You keep Oregon's offense on the sideline, you get them out of rhythm. You talk about Penn State's offense being out of rhythm in these first few non-conference games. If you can keep Oregon and Dante Moore and not being able to build that momentum early on, Oregon wants to come out and put 14 points on the board as quickly as possible. They want to take the crowd out of it. You keep the crowd in it by running the football, being methodical, and really annoy Oregon's offense by saying, we can impose our will and keep your strength on the sideline. Your preference, right? Again, Oregon would rather get into a track meet than in a rock fight. The one matchup, this is truly a one-on-one matchup here that will have the biggest impact as I see it right now. Again, Oregon plays Oregon State this weekend, so maybe things could change. But here's how I see it right now from the offense and the defensive side of the ball for Penn State. So for offense, it's the tackles against the defensive ends. I don't really have to go into detail there again. Nolan Rucci, Drew Shelton are going to have their work cut out for them with Tuioti and Uiagalelei. And that's because, again, of what they can do, both in the pass rush and in run defense. But then, on the defensive side of the football for the Nittany Lions, you got to watch out, okay, which wide receiver? Is it Dante Moore and Jim Knowles or something like that? Could be. I think Jim Knowles and Will Stein more so. It's more the head coaching, more of the coordinator battle, because Jim Knowles had cracked the code in that Rose Bowl quarterfinal last season where he had everything that Will Stein had planned didn't matter. Jim Knowles had everything figured out. So maybe that's one. But a true football player versus football player, know these names. Penn State fans know Zach Wheatley. For anybody that's watching from the Oregon side of things, Zach Wheatley is Penn State's star safety. And he hasn't shown up in the box score quite a bit, but that's because their offenses aren't throwing at him. Jim Knowles is putting him in prime position to make plays and just be somebody that disrupts the flow of everything. I'm not here to say that he is a Caleb Downs, but he is being utilized in the same way that Caleb Downs was. He's filling that role, at least right now, very admirably. But I think there's more room for him to make those impact type of plays, truly game-changing. He is going to be responsible for covering Kenyon Sadiq. I do think Penn State will use some linebacker help at times, Tony Rojas, but with Zach Wheatley being down in the box more often, as opposed to that center fielder, last line of defense, he'll still do that too periodically. But Kenyon Sadiq, who is this world-class tight end, I see him as a day one NFL draft pick, honestly. I've been so impressed with Sadiq to this point. Freak athlete, avid blocker, but he's more so a pass catcher here. He's going to be Dante Moore's most reliable target all season long. Oregon fans, feel free to correct me, but I am a huge fan of Kenyon Sadiq, so maybe that's why, just from seeing him from afar. And that's the matchup. If Dante Moore and this offense are going to get going, if they're going to get clicking, it's going to be because Moore and Sadiq are connecting on a routine basis, and Zach Wheatley has to disrupt that. So watch that individual matchup. The free safety versus the tight end. Who's going to win that battle? I think at points in time, they're going to trade punches. They really do. I think Zach Wheatley's going to get his. I also think Kenyon Sadiq is going to get his in this game. But that's the matchup that I have circled the most when it comes to one football player versus another. All right, so the depth chart. It's really starting to come together where guys are overtaking the predetermined starters out of preseason camp. We're going to discuss some of that coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app where making the right call can actually pay off. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right means cashing in. And with football back, Prize Picks is the simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. Just pick more or less on a 2 to 6 player projection, and you can turn your takes into real prizes, all in less than 60 seconds. Do you have any predictions for this upcoming weekend? Do you think that Josh Allen is going to have more or less than his passing yards? Or what about Saquon Barkley? Do you think he'll have over or under his touchdown projection or his rushing yards total? The best part, even if one of your picks misses, Prize Picks invented the flex play so you can still double your money. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That is code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you are ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. Just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app for football, for baseball, for a bunch of other different sports all across FanDuel. FanDuel makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your favorite team or you're just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, it's easy, it's the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays and your Saturdays too. Again, with college football, you can bet on Penn State football. You can bet on the Steelers. You can bet on the Eagles. Like I said, you're following your favorite team, or if there's other sports you're interested in, head over to FanDuel if you are ready to play. So download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That is FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. And if it wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets. Are we seeing a bit of a shakeup in the depth chart here after 3 non-conference games? Couple of positions in the defensive backfield, so in the secondary and tight end as well. So that's what we'll discuss here in the final segment. Tight end. Lofty expectations, as there should be, for a former 5-star prospect in Luke Reynolds. But Andrew Rappleyea is someone that should not be looked past in this conversation. So the tight end room is crowded. There are a lot of promising players even further down on the depth chart, but to focus on the main 3, Khalil Dinkins, Luke Reynolds, and Andrew Rappleyea, that was the depth chart going into this season. Preseason, leading into week 1, it was that order. Khalil Dinkins, Luke Reynolds, Andrew Rappleyea. But now we're seeing, honestly, all 3 of them share the responsibility. Now they're going to do different things when they're out there on the football field. For example, Khalil Dinkins is the most reliable run blocker of the 3, but Andrew Rappleyea is not too far off. Luke Reynolds, though, phenomenal receiver. So they're all better at one specific trait. Luke Reynolds is the receiving tight end. He can block, but he's more of a pass catcher. Khalil Dinkins, he can catch. He can be a reliable wide receiver. He can be a reliable pass catcher, He is a tight end, after all. But Dinkins is much more known for his blocking. And then honestly, Rappleyea is good at both. There isn't one that he's significantly better at. He can lay a block, he can make a catch in the open field and get some yards after the catch, as well as we've seen early on in the season. They're almost like a 1A, B, and C at this point in time. But here, when we're talking about tight end one, that's the main pass catcher. That's going to be the guy that is prominent in the stat sheet, in the box score, and we continue to see Luke Reynolds emerge as that player. Luke Reynolds is already starting to overtake that tight end one responsibility where you can't keep him off of the football field because he just has such an impact within the offense. I know what James Franklin said about how Khalil Dinkins has a future in the NFL, bright future. He's going to be a player that we're not talking about enough. Well, in the non-conference schedule, we haven't been talking about him enough because he really hasn't had that much of an impact. But Luke Reynolds to this point in time has been phenomenal. Drew Allar trusts him a ton. And it's good to see that Penn State has another receiving option just in general. From the transfer wide receivers to now Luke Reynolds. And again, they can trust Andrew Rapplier as well. So one player specifically isn't going to dominate in terms of snap counts, but they might dominate in the stat sheet. And so far that has been Luke Reynolds to this point in time. Reynolds had 4 receptions, 73 yards against Villanova, did not get into the end zone, but the week before had an even better performance, honestly. 7 catches for 58 yards. Reynolds still has to find the end zone, but he's been the most reliable pass catcher of those 3 tight ends. You will see Dinkins and Rapplier be a little more involved in the blocking, so the responsibilities in terms of how much are they going to be used just in general will be equal, but we're starting to see a shuffle in the passing attack. And Luke Reynolds is emerging as that true number 1 tight end target for Allar. Okay, going over to the defense. Is there a new starting strong safety? Well, based on the Villanova game, yes, there is. It was Antoine Belgrave Shorter that was named as the starting strong safety, but James Franklin immediately prefaced and said, this is a position that's going to be rotating a ton. And he was not kidding. Dejon Lane's been out there a bunch. King Mack's been out there a bunch. Now, here's the interesting thing about King Mack. Remember, King Mack transferred out to Alabama. Grass isn't always greener. Comes back to Penn State, and he hasn't missed a step. Honestly. Now, Mack was dealing with some bumps and bruises, but now seems to be really utilized here. Everything's good, and he's starting to emerge as someone who's more reliable. And what that's done is it's cut into the playing time of Antoine Belgrave Shorter. Here's the nice thing for Penn State, kind of like a tight end. At strong safety, you can go with Lane, you can go with Antoine Belgrave Shorter, you can go with Mack. You are going to get good talent, good skill on the football field at all times. But Penn State's got to find the most reliable of the 3, and King Mack's the one that's starting to overtake the other 2. Lane will still play, Belgrave Shorter will still play because kind of like a tight end, they're all better, they're more unique at different skill sets in run defense, in pass coverage. I think Belgrave Shorter because he was the turnover king in training camp this upcoming season here, but he's better in pass defense. He's better at forcing turnovers. King Mack, though, is kind of better at seeing the field overall, just kind of has better vision, is able to stop the run, is not a liability in one category. It's kind of like Rapplier to an extent where he has a lot more balance to his game. So it's nice to see that Penn State, through the transfer portal, is able to pick up a starting caliber player that they can just inject right into the lineup there. Either way, Penn State, solid depth at that strong safety spot, but we are seeing King Mack now overtake that spot and really separate himself and be that true starting strong safety, even though I still have high expectations for a Belgrave Shorter, and Dejon Lane was at the top of a lot of people's list when it came to breakout candidates for this season. The more the merrier, right? In a defense that runs a 4-2-5, so you need those guys in the secondary. Now at cornerback. Safety has a little more clarity. Cornerback, I'm kind of unsure after A.J. Harris. But if Villanova tells us anything, Elliott Washington did not play a whole lot against Villanova. After snap counts were pretty equal against FIU and against Nevada. Davian Collins is that other player. Who is that cornerback to? Well, if you look at Villanova, just Villanova, Collins played 31 snaps. Elliott Washington only played 12. That is a start. It's not 20 to 10. 18 to 15, something like that, where the margin's pretty close, or 25 to 15. Elliott Washington only played a dozen snaps. Collins, maybe they were trying to give Collins a little bit more of a run. Same thing with Nicholas Singleton and Kaytron Allen, where we've seen Allen off to this hot start and Singleton, kind of working through some things, as we can see. It's not the same Nicholas Singleton that we've been accustomed to there. And I don't have any issues with that, actually. In this non-conference slate, I don't have any issues with a player getting some more playing time just to continue to work some things through if they're struggling with anything. So that could be one sign, is that, hey, Elliott Washington really didn't need to play against Villanova. They've seen enough from him in practices that he is the guy. He is cornerback number 2. We will get the answer to that against Oregon. But Adavian Collins, again, playing a lot because, again, Kaytron Allen was doing so much better. And he has his snap count reduced against Villanova, and Nicholas Singleton gets those additional carries. Cornerback 2, not entirely cleared up. Elliott Washington, I think, is better in pass defense. Adavian Collins is better in run defense. A little more of a physical caliber cornerback. So against Oregon, if I had to guess, I would say that Elliott Washington is going to play more because the matchup dictates it. The matchup demands that you need your better coverage cornerback out there more often. Not they could play both of them at the same time. One of those guys can slide into the slot or move to a safety spot and be that floating, ranging defensive back. Okay? But if you're looking for a concrete starter, it's probably going to be Elliott Washington against Oregon because, like I said, the matchup needs it if you're going to slow down, if you're going to try to slow down this Oregon offense. Hey, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Appreciate each and every one of you. We got some exciting content planned throughout the week. More football, more early thoughts about Penn State and Oregon, really diving into this matchup and what each team brings after these first 3 games. Also, talking some wrestling, talking some hockey. So for more coverage around your favorite Penn State sports teams, you got to keep it right here on Locked On Nittany Lions. As we do this daily, we have these conversations daily. If you're not an everydayer, become one. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts.